every Weeknd album ranked from least favorite to most favorite. This list is purely based on how much I enjoy each album. To make things more interesting, I will separate the Trilogy mixtapes. Starboy, released after Beauty Behind the Madness, an album that already saw the Weeknd leaning heavily into mainstream appeal. Starboy, as its title suggests, feels like an even stronger push in that direction, with many of its songs sounding even more bland and cleanly produced than all of his other work. Beauty Behind the Madness still had a little bit of those dark and sensual moments that were present on Trilogy, in Often for example, of course nowhere near as dark, but still there. But on Starboy, it feels like all of that was completely stripped away. Not that Abel needs to replicate the Trilogy sound to make a good album. As much as I love Trilogy, I wouldn't want his entire discography to sound like a copy and paste of a bunch of House of Balloons. But I have to admit, as creatively bankrupt as that idea sounds, the album Starboy doesn't sound that much more creative either, and it's difficult to see the Weeknd's other strong points when he taps out of the Trilogy sound. For the 18 songs this album has, there isn't enough variety or unique and fresh instrumentals to keep my engagements going. There are some highlights on here like Reminder, whose soothing beats paired with the Weeknd's calm yet confident voice as he spits some catchy flows makes it the most addicting song on the album. The title track also deserves all the success it received. The Daft Punk drum beat is so pleasurable, and over it, Abel delivers even more earworm moments than he did on Reminder. The way that third verse starts as well, it just has to be one of my favorite post-Trilogy moments in his discography. His flow is just so satisfyingly smooth, and as unnecessary as the overblown use of autotune is on his voice during his opening verse on Sidewalks, he absolutely killed his verse to the point where I would even go as far to say that he outshines Kendrick. But with all that said, there are more misses than hits, and Starboy stands as one of the most inconsistent listens in his discography, as well as his most poorly executed album. While he does bring more variety to the table than he did on his previous album, it feels like he was giving us the most generic results out of the new sounds he was attempting. And for such a long set of tracks, Abel really doesn't have many things to sing about other than his success and wealth. Kissland. Considering the fact that Kissland was the album released right after the legendary trio of the Trilogy mixtapes, this is a top contender for the most disappointing album in 2010's R&B. It's as if during the worst moments on this album, the Weeknd was trying to make moody and dark R&B songs like he did on Trilogy, but completely forgot how to create a cohesive song structure or good melody. Just because each respective section of the two-part opener Professional sounds incomplete and doesn't go anywhere, doesn't mean putting these two parts together will fix that problem. Not only are both parts not that great, but combining them together is like putting Sprite and banana together. During dull moments like this, Abel does sometimes bring a decent melody every now and then, but they are surrounded by so many forgettable ones that it doesn't even matter. The melody during the intro to the second verse of part 2 of Professional is so great that it should have been the chorus instead. Kissland is pretty one-dimensional instrumentally too. The beats to Adaptation and Love in the Sky sound so identical to each other that I often confuse the two songs. The most different beat you get on this album is probably Belong to the World, but it's so overly dramatic that it's obnoxious. It's like a bad musical score to a low-budget superhero movie. I'd rather listen to that copy and paste drum pattern from Adaptation and Love in the Sky again. I honestly do believe the lonesome cyberpunk-infused Japanese city nightlife aesthetic that the Weeknd was trying to fulfill on this album had the potential to be something truly entrancing and magnificent, and he did realize that potential to a great extent on one song here, the title track, which in a track list full of songs with directionless structures has two parts that sits between a ghostly beat switch and complement each other perfectly like puzzle pieces, both beautifully haunting in their own distinct ways. I love how ominous and sensual the first half is, but the second half is on a whole other level, featuring possibly my favorite verse that the Weeknd has ever sung. His super up close yet nonchalant vocals only make his flows sound even more satisfying to the ears, to the point where it may even border on ASMR in R&B form. The song overall is easily one of my favorite Weeknd songs of all time, and it's a shame that the rest of the album doesn't sound nearly as incredible. Live For is the only other track that comes close to the excellence of that song. I love the ominous claps that reminds me of The Fall from Echoes of Silence, and Drake complements the song's vibe really well too. After hearing a fairly long run of mid-tier Weeknd songs, hearing Drake is actually a breath of fresh air. I also like how this song is more straightforward than the others. Wanderlust as well is an amazing groovy disco-ish synth-pop cut, which I guess you could say steps away from the sensual darkness of the record, but it still keeps the Neon City nightlife vibe intact with all the futuristic synth grooves like a great city pop song would. And despite how underdeveloped and directionless I find Tears in the Rain and Pretty are for their lengthy runtimes, the core tunes of both songs are still good. Yeah, this entire second half of the album is so much better than the first, but as I already hinted earlier, this has to be his messiest album overall. Beauty Behind the Madness, the moment in time this was released, between Kissland that came before and Starboy that came after, just makes so much sense in explaining how this album sounds. It really takes the nightlife dark vibes of Kissland and pushes them into a super poppy approach that he would later explore more deeply on Starboy, despite a few amazing songs on here that for some reason are all in the middle of the track list, such as Often and Shameless. Beauty Behind the Madness overall felt like a confirmation of decline. The groundbreaking R&B sounds of his early mixtapes was increasingly overtaken by a saturated pop sound that Abel was nowhere near as strong at. This led to really unexciting songs like Earned It, a track so bland that it features one of the most predictable rhyme schemes of 2010s mainstream pop. That beat drop in Losers is a definitive example of the blandest and safest results that came from the Weeknd tapping into the pop mainstream sound at the time. Even the better songs here have their flaws. Acquainted, despite how phenomenal the vocal melodies are, suffers from a song structure that is just overly long. Once you've heard the first half of the song, you've pretty much heard the rest. The nearly 6 minutes runtime is unjustified. The outro and bridge adds nothing to the track. As for the rest of the songs that aren't highlights, they're just alright. On Tell Your Friends, the Kanye produced beat is fine, the chorus is fine, the lyrics are whatever. The album overall plays it so safe, even if the Weeknd is experimenting with different styles here and there. I do think the best moments on this album are enough to put it over Starboy and Kissland, from the incredible chorus on the distorted drop in the hills, to the bop Often, which is as insanely infectious as it is freaky, to my favourite song on the album, Shameless, where his pop appeal is at its strongest. There are genuinely great moments here, but overall those great moments feel like a beautiful crystal clear coral reef in an ocean of polluted grey water. Dawn FM, now we get into the good part of the Weeknd's discography. Dawn FM, the second installment in the Weeknd synth pop trilogy, was a great follow-up to After Hours, more than people give it credit for. I love the concept of making the album feel like you're literally listening to a radio with Jim Carrey doing the narration. Surprisingly, he fits perfectly with the vibes of the record. He could have easily sounded out of place given his enthusiastic persona, which on paper you wouldn't expect to mesh well with the Weeknd's moody R&B sound, but he works in seamlessly, making the album more entertaining and giving it extra personality. Even though Dawn FM wasn't as massive a moment as After Hours, some of the best songs here are on par with the best tracks from that album. By this point, people were already used to Abel going synth pop, so this record wasn't as mind-blowing as hearing the 80s inspired sound he first introduced on After Hours. As a result, I feel like people weren't as hyped over this album, which I find a little sad because there are some truly amazing highs here. I love the deep voice he uses on Gasoline. It really makes the chorus pop, almost like he's featuring on his own song. The Weeknd does absolute justice over a city pop beat on Out of Time. The late night neon lit city vibes he was trying to capture on Kissland come across far more effectively here in a truly captivating way. To go over my issues with this album, given the creative peaks that Tyler and The Weeknd were at during this period, the song they have together here is really disappointing. The collaboration with Lil Wayne is similarly underwhelming too. Honestly, Dawn FM would have been stronger without any features. After Hours, after a pretty long span of mid-tier albums that completely paled in comparison to Trilogy, The Weeknd finally came back to form with this album, which at the time it dropped was my favourite album of his since Trilogy. The pop direction that he had been taking for years up until this point resulted in bloated albums full of generic filler tracks that couldn't live up to the highs of his earlier work. Those records, as I already mentioned, had Abel playing it too safe for the most part. While After Hours is still of course has mainstream appeal, I mean Blinding Lights is one of the most streamed songs of all time. The fact that even critics adored this album is proof that it was a satisfying change of pace for him. By throwing it back to the 80s and delivering addictive synth pop jams, the production on this album felt far fresher and more captivating than it did on My Dear Melancholy or Starboy. The title track, which was the third single from the record, proved that what Abel was doing on this album was completely new compared to anything he had done before. With the slow and dark build-up in the beginning, followed by the epic beat drop and the instantly catchy high sound chorus, the track makes the build-up completely worthwhile. I know the song itself isn't wildly experimental, but for an artist this mainstream, it was pretty daring to release a single of this length and feature this many different switch-ups. By this point, after so long, it was clear that Abel finally knew how to stick the landing when it came to more unconventional song structures again. There were obvious risks Abel could have faced when tapping into the synth pop sound. He could have easily butchered it and ended up with the most generic 80s throwback pop record to come out of the mainstream, but no, he really shines on this one. From front to back, there are still filler tracks that are admittedly too boring for my taste. Snow Child and Escape from LA may be the most tedious 2-track run of The Weeknd's last 3 albums, but Hardest to Love, Save Your Tears and In Your Eyes feature some of Abel's best tunes in years. The synth line on Blinding Lights is so iconic that it really feels like the Take On Me of this generation, and once again, the title track still stands as one of Abel's greatest singles. Thursday, first Trilogy mixtape entry on this list, and even though this is the weakest of the 3, I still think it's a pretty amazing project. Just like House of Balloons and Echoes of Silence, the atmosphere of the music here is dark, but the darkness and depressive vibes takes things to a whole new level on this record. This is easily the most ominous sounding project of the 3, from the gloomy yet heavy guitars on Life of the Party, which sounds like the first thing you'd hear when entering hell, to the beginning of The Birds Part 2 with the sound of feminine crying that ends with a gunshot. This record is unnerving the whole way through. Speaking of The Birds, both Parts 1 and Part 2 feature phenomenal vocal performances. He's really singing his heart out on both tracks. I also find it interesting that Part 1 is probably the most upbeat cut out of the 9 tracks, whereas The Birds Part 2 is arguably the darkest sounding song in his entire career. Then only 2 tracks after Part 2 we get Rolling Stone, a melancholic acoustic ballad with Abel singing much softer and quieter. There's a wide range of vocal directions on this record, but the melancholic darkness still carries consistently throughout. I guess my main issue with this tape is that it isn't that consistent in terms of enjoyability. The duds really go nowhere to the point where they feel much longer than they actually are. The eerily captivating keys on Gone don't lead to anything attention grabbing despite the song's 8 minutes runtime. The chorus on the title track may be the most uninteresting one in all of Trilogy, but still, the high highs do make up for some of the issues I have with this project. While the moody and incredibly ominous directions the songs take don't always land perfectly, when they do, they really land. One last thing, The Zone still stands as the best song The Weeknd and Drake has ever made together. Hurry Up Tomorrow, I see this as the most cinematic album in his discography. It truly feels like a movie-like experience. It's a shame that the actual film attached to the album was bad, but let's not dwell on that. Musically, really we move through all these different moods, thoughts, and stories in a way that genuinely feels like watching a film, as if each track is a distinct scene. This album is nearly everything I could ask for in a final Weeknd release. Not only does he deliver over 20 tracks of material, but he also explores all the different sounds and genres he's experimented with throughout his career. There are early Weeknd vibes, modern Weeknd vibes, and satisfying unexpected crossovers that work brilliantly, like the one with Justice. The listening experience is adventurous, moving, and above all, epic. It can shift from energetic and fun, as in Timeless, to a tear-jerking piano ballad on the album Closer, which serves perfectly as the credit rolling scene at the end of a movie. Hurry Up Tomorrow is an excellent curtain closing moment to a decade-and-a-half long discography, and a rare example where the final entry in a trilogy is actually the best one. Echoes of Silence, while this isn't my favorite Trilogy mixtape, I do think that it features some of the most outstanding vocal performances that The Weeknd has ever laid to tape. I'm mainly referring to Same Old Song and his incredible cover of Michael Jackson's Dirty Diana. The devastating chorus to Same Old Song has so much passion and pain put into it that I can't help but get goosebumps every time I listen to it, and in DD, you can really tell that Abel truly tried his hardest to do it justice, as it is very difficult to cover a Michael Jackson song successfully. What I like most about this cover is that he took the dancey hard rock vibes of the original and flipped them into something slower, darker, and more beautiful. I absolutely love it when The Weeknd sings the chorus in a more soothing and quieter way the second time it comes on. It really contrasts well with the passionately vigorous vocals the first time he sings the chorus. The Michael Jackson version makes me want to dance, while Abel's version makes me want to stare at the ceiling and cry. Outside is one of his most underrated songs ever. I truly view it as one of Weeknd's best tracks. The haunting beauty of that song is something that I don't even think he replicated on the other songs throughout Trilogy, because of how specifically unique and special it is. I do think the tape slows down in quality as you get closer to the end. The title track is one of the most forgettable moments on Trilogy, and as much as I love Next and The Fall, I do think they drag on a bit longer than they needed to, and even with all the praise that I've given to Same Old Song, that Juicy J feature does not need to be there. His feature completely ends the melancholic and heart-wrenching vibe of everything that came before it. It just sounds so annoyingly out of place. Puts this outro where Juicy talks about how The Weeknd gets the ladies wet on a more upbeat Weeknd song like The Morning maybe. Don't place it at the end of one of the slowest and saddest songs on Echoes of Silence. It makes no sense. I'm sorry, but his feature is the equivalent of awkwardly laughing and cracking a joke during the most serious situation possible. House of Balloons, sometimes the most popular choice is the best choice. This mixtape is near perfect for many reasons. Very few R&B musicians out there had a debut project as fantastic as this one under their belt. This tape was such a breath of fresh air for R&B. The super dark, mysterious, depressing, but also sensual and almost ethereal vibes that this record has are something that would go on to shape R&B for the rest of the 2010s decade. In a way, the dark and sexual atmosphere of this record is reminiscent of Justin Timberlake's album Future Sex Love Sounds, but turned up multiple notches and way better. And that mysterious image that this tape had certainly went hand in hand with The Weeknd's identity at the time, since you have to remember, Abel was so unknown at this super early stage in his career that people mistook The Weeknd for being a band. The dream pop samples that are incorporated throughout some of these tracks take the heavenly, otherworldly feelings that those original songs had and turn them into something so beautiful yet so dark and gloomy that it's like a thin line between heaven and hell. Glass Table Girls is especially dark and has The Weeknd rapping in an almost super deadpan tired voice that sticks out much more due to the passionate vocal performances he was delivering earlier in House of Balloons. And as for the most heavenly moment on the record, the first thing that pops into my head is the gorgeous bassy beat drop that happens in High for This, which still stands as his best album opener. The verse to Loft music blew my mind when I first heard it. The 4 minutes of pure instrumental are so unprogressive that they feel very unnecessary and adds nothing to the track. I wouldn't say there's a single skip on here, and I'd even say say that the tracklist is further improved with the context of the full Trilogy album, as 28 is a near perfect closing track. While Thursday is the darkest sounding tape, Echoes of Silence has the best vocal performances. House of Balloons, I feel, is the catchiest and the best produced out of the three. If it weren't for the groundbreaking sounds he was pursuing on this record, modern R&B would look entirely different. Click here if you want to see my other album ranking videos such as Kanye, Kendrick and A$AP Rocky. Please like and subscribe.